before anything else, I'd like to thank Brother Jess once again for all the resources. Sister Mel for assisting me with a PowerPoint, which I'm not very good at, and I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Father Les, as always. So I'd like to preface the discussion of tonight's economic and political morality with the most important premise of all. So could we show slide 2, please? Okay, according to Louis Berkhoff, a Dutch-American Reformed theologian born in 1873, and he is the author of Systematic Theology, which is highly influential among seminaries and Bible colleges. He says man is not only the crown of God's creation, but also the very main object of God's care. So with this, let us move on to slide 3, please. Do politics and economics discourage moral behavior? And according to Bill Donahue, who is the president of the Catholic League of the United States since 1993 to the present, he says a leadership strategy without ethical clarity produces moral and economic bankruptcy. So with this, I'd like to give some background, although I'm sure everybody's familiar. Everybody knows what economics and political morality is all about, but let me just refresh our knowledge of this. First, I start with a question: why can't politics and economics be seen in isolation when they are supposedly two separate disciplines? Economics is concerned with studying and influencing the economy, fundamentally the trade or flow of goods and currency, and basically the supply and demand thereof. Politics is the theory and practice of influencing people through the exercise of power, that is governments, elections, and of course, the political parties. In theory, economics could be non-political. Ideally, it should ignore any political bias or prejudice to give neutral, unbiased information and recommendations on how to improve the economic performance of a country. However, in practice, there is a strong relationship between economics and politics because the performance of the economy is one of the key battlegrounds of politics. Many economic issues are inherently political because they lend themselves to different opinions. Moral economy refers to economic activities that are viewed through a moral and not just a material lens. And that is, in our contemporary world, this concept is constantly revisited depending on its usage in differing social, economic, ecological, and geographic situations and times. A general practice is that economists prefer to sidestep moral issues, claiming that they study the trade-offs and incentives, leaving judgment to a very politically driven deciding group of our society. So a question that is difficult to answer once again is, to what extent can and do politics and economics hold a capacity for virtue? And what about political morality? Political morality is also known as public ethics. It is making moral judgments about political actions and political agents or the politicians per se. It covers both ethics of process, which is the method of office, and ethics of policy, which involves judgment surrounding policies and laws. Political realists often claim that ethics has no place in politics. And for politicians to be effective, they cannot be bound by moral rules. in the pursuit of certain interests, for example, economic stability, they will more often than not tend to justify their claims based on their own moral principles. They can even go through lengths showing that ethics can be harmful or even counterproductive to their plans of action. Going back to the 15th century, we have this political theorist by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli, who says that a political leader can behave in evil ways in order to maintain his authority. Paradoxical indeed that some may do wrong to do right, violence to prevent violence. And we also have this 19th century philosopher by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche, who was even more influential than Karl Marx, the proponent of socialism, who claims that there is a need to overcome cultural and moral values to give way to new values. Nietzsche believes that the Uberman or the strong man, with his great power, can assert his prerogatives and his authority. The norm is that the stronger man rules. The strong overpowers the weak. This is so glaring in our contemporary world. We Catholics believe that there is no justification for a wrong act, even if it serves the purpose. The end does not justify the means. Now, to those with a conscience, a conflict of interest arises between private conviction, that is, the ability to feel guilty about what you do, versus achieving the end at all costs. So, being calloused about anything, it's just achieving whatever, achieving the end is the most important. I'd like to make allusions to what Bishop Barron said last Sunday in his homily. He said that Catholic teachings do not demonize power, whether it's cultural, economic, or political. He said, what we should do instead is to keep praying for these people who are in power. He also mentioned about movements that are trying to knock down structures that are meant to promote peace and order. For example, people clamoring to defund the police because they say that the police are abusive in their exercise of authority. But little do they know that maybe for every 1,000 good policemen, there can only be maybe 2 or 3 bad apples. And instead of just removing the bad apples or weeding out the dead weeds, they want to destroy what promotes peace and order. And he also said, how come we could not just divert our thoughts to God Almighty himself, who is the source of all power? So power in itself is not bad because it comes from God. The political, cultural, or economic power should be our participation in the power of God. It should be the delegated authority of the supreme power of God. And if power has the capacity to effect change and order for the proper functioning of life's affairs and realities, then definitely it is not bad at all. Even Saint Augustine he terms peace as tranquilitas ordinis, meaning the tranquility of order coming from an ordered society, attributed to the proper exercise of social, economic, and political power. So if we have this proper exercise of power in every aspect, then it becomes sanctified. The work is sanctified. It becomes opus Dei, or work of God. And for that, kindly refer to CCC 2427 in our notes. Okay, so can we go to slide 6, please? Slide 6. Okay. You see here a can of a popular product that is very, very popular among the rich and the affluent, primarily for for the price. It's a very expensive delicacy that originated from France, but are now being produced in the United States, in Canada, in some countries, and you would not believe it, in China even. Okay. We know that animals do not have souls, yet they are endowed with very keen perception. They are capable of the basic senses and much more so, fear and pain. Inflicting pain and cruelty to animals is an abuse of God's creation. It is true that they are meant to serve the needs of man, but can't we be happy just enjoying them in a normal way? The very reason why I chose this canned item is because I'd like to point out that even when we were taught about symbiosis, when we were kids in science and biology, and the word connotes the mutually beneficial relationship of organisms. So for this purpose, man and animals for food. The normal ideal is man takes care of God-given resources so that it may bear good fruit beneficial to man. However, greed for money motivate the production of this item, because this is cruelty, unparalleled cruelty. To produce a foie gras, okay, this is fatty liver. Workers use a process called gavage, which is force feeding. They force feed ducks and geese to be able to come up with enlarged fatty livers. And that's the very delicacy that graced the table of fine dining restaurants and parties of affluent people. Twice a day, workers ram down pipes in the throats of male ducks and geese, pumping about 2.2 pounds of grain and fat into their stomachs. Or the geese 3 times a day, up to 4 pounds daily in this process. This force feeding caused the bird's liver to swell up to 10 times their normal size. Many birds have difficulty standing because their engorged livers distend their abdomens, and they may even tear out their own feathers and attack and kill each other because of stress. The birds are kept in very tiny cages or crowded sheds. In fact, a Newsweek reporter who visited a foie gras factory farm described the ducks as listless and often lame from foot infection due to standing on metal grills during the gavage. There's also a group called People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. And in short, this is called PETA. They conducted an investigation at a Hudson Valley, New York foie gras company, and they found that a single worker was expected to force feed 500 birds 3 times each day. This pace meant that they are treating the birds roughly, leaving them injured and suffering, and sometimes they die from ruptured organs resulting from overfeeding. And, the company even gives a huge bonus to workers who kill less than 50 birds per month. More birds, force-fed, bring in more income, okay? Isn't this very hypocritical? We stop when we drive on roads. We stop when there are cows and dogs and birds or chickens passing by. But then you cannot imagine this cruelty that is being inflicted just to come up with this delicacy for the ones who can really afford it. Okay, so I could go on and on and on about this unparalleled cruelty. But you know, I cannot bear to eat this product every time I think of the agony of ducks and the geese. It just haunts me. Okay, so much for the foie gras. Sister Mel, can we move on to slide 7, please? The right to private property. I wish to put emphasis on CCC 2405. Those who hold goods for use and consumption should use them with moderation, reserving the better part for guests, for the sick, and the poor. What comes to my mind is what we were talking about the last time. Hoarding. Hoarding renders the economic cycle abnormal. Supply and demand fluctuations lead to scarcity and high prices, and hence, again, the poor, the marginalized, are the ones heavily impacted. Okay. So slide 8, please. Here are the sins against the 7th commandment. So for our discussion tonight, the 7th and the 10th commandment will be the highlights because they lend relevance to economic and political morality. So here you have several, about 5 on the list, but if you look at the notes, there are about 14 very specific actions, gestures, and bad deeds that could fall and be categorized under these sins that are being shown here on the screen. Theft is a very broad umbrella that essentially would yield the ultimate effect of these sins. If you look at your notes, you would see that aside from theft per se, you have business fraud, you have paying unjust wages. I'd like to go to business fraud first. Business fraud, it's deceit. Deceit is a form of theft because you are illegally trying to gain whatever is not yours. Okay, and then the victim, the poor victim, is a victim of deceit. In other words, the perpetrator makes representations as a matter of fact. And you have paying unjust wages. When you pay unjust wages, you break a contract. You are supposed to give what is due a worker that is a just remuneration for services rendered. Then you have forcing up prices by taking advantage of the ignorance or hardships of others. So that's artificially creating supply and demand. And business, this is also business fraud, and which will eventually lead to enslavement of human beings. Human beings are being treated like commodities, not like the humans, human beings with dignity. Then you have speculation, in which one contrives to manipulate the prices of goods artificially in order to gain advantage to the detriment of others. So again, what is that? We're trying to enslave our own. We're enslaving human beings here. We're abusing, and again, this is to the detriment of the marginalized. Corruption in which one influences the judgment of those who make decisions according to law. By the way, these things that I am enumerating are in your notes, and these fall under the commandment, sin against the 7th commandment. So to continue, this is classified as theft, enslavement of human beings, because you're stepping on the dignity of people just to suit your end. Appropriation and use for private purposes of the common goods of an enterprise. So that's being dishonest. Like, for example, you're working in a company and you are using, let's say, just simple things, stationery, for example, and you're taking, that tantamounts to stealing, because you have printing paper, you have probably staplers. Even those little things, they constitute theft and stealing. Work that is poorly done, that is also theft. You're not utilizing the hours for which you are being remunerated properly for doing your work. So when you render work that is poorly done or haphazardly done, then you are not living up to your duties. Okay, and it is always good to understand, and to remember that work is God-given, and if you don't perform your work well, then you're not sanctifying work. It's not respecting what has been given to you by the Lord. So tax evasion, some people will say, it's okay, the government is rich, but even if that constitutes theft against the government, it will eventually redound to the communities, and it's stealing. It's stealing. Now, we have forgery of checks and invoices. So that's a glaring theft. Excessive expenses and waste. Excessive expenses and waste. So maybe if you're working in a company and you're trying to, you're not even mindful about the resources of the company, and you just spend left and right, and that is wasteful expense. That also constitutes theft. Then willfully damaging private or public property. That's stealing, theft from people, theft of investments, I would say. Then gambling. Gambling, I'd like to mention that specifically. Could we move on to slide 12, please? Okay, so gambling, casinos drain, the casinos that a lot of people love, they drain people's disposable income that should be dedicated to spending on basic needs. Then the vice brings on anguish and hardship to families that are affected. When recreation and relaxation turns into addiction, the addict becomes a slave to the evil vice. Then when that happens, bigger troubles ensue. People losing their homes, families that are broken because of this evil vice, and people being reduced to poverty, being reduced to beggars and homelessness. These are mostly the consequences of gambling. Slide 13, please. I also would like to make special mention about CCC 2414. It teaches us that human enhancement promotes human dignity. A human being is entitled to enjoy basic life privileges. I would like to cite an example. In the Philippines, we have this program called Kasambahay program, where even the maids are being given the benefit of having their social security and their PhilHealth, which is almost like our Medicare here. But of course, it doesn't measure up to the kind of Medicare that we have here. But that is also an example of uplifting people's lives. Just because they are maids, and we don't look at them as slaves or servants. We try to help them uplift their lives, and that is promoting their dignity. We can move on to slide 14, please. Okay, slide 14. You see here Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. It says, the Lord took the man and settled him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. CCC 2415 emphasizes that man, despite being the most superior of all creation, should have concern for the quality of life of his neighbor and the generations to come, and preserve and maintain religious respect for the integrity of God's creation. Some people are very nonchalant about, preserving and helping the environment. For example, I heard somebody at a party, there was this woman who was wrapping food for people to take home, and she was using this foil, this aluminum foil, really excessively. And the husband said, you should be a little careful using that because they're not biodegradable or biogradable. I'm getting a little confused between those two terms. And the woman just said, oh, I really don't care. And, in my mind, yeah, you wouldn't care about the next generation when probably after 30 or 50 years, when, our earth, our environment can no longer sustain all this trash and garbage, you will just find your sons and daughters and your grandchildren, living in a very dirty environment and probably suffering the ripples of the consequences like excessive flooding and all that. Okay, so we move on to slide 15, please. So here we have CCC 2417 and 2418, and this is in regard to our relationship with animals. We are taught that human lives have precedence over animals. We do need to care for them and keep them away from harm. And they give us delight, they give us joy. A lot of people depend on their pets because they don't have family close by, and they are very good companions and very loyal. And I don't blame pet owners for lavishing their animals with love that sometimes are even more than what we give to human beings. For most pet owners, pets are more loving, loyal, and caring. The truth in reality is that it is rather hard not to shower them with affection that is due only to persons. So I think it also becomes sometimes an obsession when you have pets that are, being fed lavishly or extravagantly, and you dress them and you take them to veterinarians when there are people around you who hardly eat and are homeless and are very, very distressed because no one provides for them. So this is one area where we really have to balance everything, and we try not to overlook our relationship with our co-human beings in this regard. So slide 17, please. So church and politics. Lest I be accused of being political, I'd like to tell you at the very outset that we just chose these pictures, but anything I say here does not or may not pertain to the people shown in the pictures. So what we just wanted to show here is that government officials are signing bills, left and right. Um, However, we still have this disease in our society. People having no homes, having no work, and constantly hungry. So we may not feel this as badly as in other countries, and I'd like to use the Philippines again as an example. People pay taxes, and I can attest to this, and one will always wonder where they go. There's no enhancement of public infrastructure. Healthcare is very messed up. There's a lot of scandals about funds getting lost. The poor do not have access to good education. Private schooling is a privilege for those who can afford it. College tuitions are not affordable for all. And like I said, the laws and bills that are being passed and approved left and right hardly address the most important needs of the society. Corruption has taken on such a vicious cycle that the trend is for the rich to become richer and for the poor to just die poor. In more modern societies, still there remain subhuman levels of oppression. In societies where it is much more covert, and I don't have to pinpoint where these societies are, and I don't want to be accused of being political, we suffer skyrocketing prices. I mean, people suffer all this exorbitant prices, rates of interest, low purchasing power of currencies, and needless to say, all the inflationary repercussions that are so obvious. So we go to slide 18, please. The essence of the CCC paragraphs tell us that economism is a danger of both capitalism and socialism. The Catholic Church refuses to accept in the practice of capitalism selfish individualism and the absolute primacy of the marketplace over human labor. So capitalists versus the employees, the workers. Human needs cannot be satisfied by the market alone. And the sad fact remains that there exists exploitation of labor force for companies to amass greater profits on top of dishonest practices. The profit motive gives way to a capital sin, which is popularly known as greed. So neither does our church fully support socialism. Socialism here, which subordinates the basic right of individuals and groups to collective ownership and to the needs of the community. Here, there is a ruling class and everybody just follows. And what's the consequence? It denies personal autonomy and dignity. It destroys the basis for true human community. So I read an article where Albert Camus, he's a French philosopher of the 1900s. He says that the welfare of the people in particular has always been the alibi of tyrants, and it provides the further advantage of giving the servants of tyranny a good conscience. So it's like brainwashing. People get used to it and they accept it as, that's life. It's part of life. So what then is the good cure for all of this? We need a balanced and reasonable attitude towards profit. And this balance leans towards solidarity. The culture of which nowadays is dominated by envy and the unrestrained desire to possess. Pope John Paul says, or Saint John Paul says, the second says that he defines it this way. Solidarity is not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, but the firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. for every individual, good for every individual, because we are responsible for everyone. In this day and age, it has a special name, which is charity. However, it should not be false charity. It has to be a true, sincere, and proactive effort to carry each other's burden. It's not just charity via lip service, but it really has to be a proactive effort to carry each other's burden. So we have slide 19, please. Okay. So we go to the 10th commandment. The 10th commandment forbids coveting the goods of others. It forbids greed and the desire to amass earthly goods without limit. It forbids avarice arising from a passion for riches and their attendant power. So attendant power, when you have the money, when you're there up top, then there's a lot of relative power that goes with it to perpetrate abuse. Okay, so we go to slide 20, please. Love of money is the root of all evils. We are all aware of this. And of course, I bet no one has never ever said, can claim that he has never said that the love of money is the source of all evils. The consequences when we become too attached and eventually slaves to money and all the earthly possession brings on all the evil. And I guess that is very self-explanatory. We know that. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, and in Luke chapter 12, verses 16 to 21, this kind of love is a trap that turns into foolish and harmful desires. What happens now if we are just amassing and storing earthly treasures and losing our souls? This does not make us rich before God's eyes. And if this happens, we are so poor in what matters to God. So slide 21, please. One of the very hard sins to conquer because of our human nature is envy. But we always have to remember that this is one of the 7 deadly sins. The CCC paragraphs mentioned here, 2538, 2539, and 2540, tells us that we have to delight and be happy with our brother's success, progress, or happiness. It doesn't make us any happier when we're always harboring envy. It just makes us angry, and sometimes it brings on frustration and sadness whenever we harbor these feelings. Humans as we are, it takes a lot of prayer and trusting in God to avoid falling into this sin. Could we move on to slide 22, please? Excuse me. Blessed are the poor in spirit. So beautiful is Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21. Indeed, where your treasure is, there also will your heart be. Pardon me. If we could move on to slide 23. I do apologize. I have to just mute myself because my throat is irritated. Just give me one quick second. So CCC 2547 talks of holy abandonment. It is abandonment to the providence of the Father in heaven that frees us from anxiety over tomorrow. For Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 to 34, seek first the kingdom of God and all will be given you. Do not be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself because God never fails to provide. And I do remember about this Filipino evangelist by the name of Bo Sanchez. I'm sure all of you have heard about him. He's famous internationally, and he started his preaching ministry at the age of 13. These very words of his resonates in my ear. He says, always remember that God is always busy thinking of ways to bless us. So we give that a big amen. And that ends our presentation for tonight. And thank you for listening. And we would